My name is Jim McKenna and I'm Professor of Physical Activity and Health at Leeds Beckett University, and I'm in the Carnegie faculty. When we're approached by Bradford Public Health to undertake an evaluation of the programs that they're delivering in some of the primary schools in Bradford, we're very excited about that. Our interest is one in the kind of physical activity side of things, but also in looking for something that's a good news story where we have an intervention which looks like it's trying to do something substantial and important with very needy groups, and we're very excited to be involved with something that is clearly meeting a public health agenda. Our work in relation to our Active Lifestyles Research Centre is really centred on two main areas of work which we do regularly and often. We have about 30 full-time academic staff who are active researching in this area. We address the physical activity impact in relation to human performance, whether that's in children in school, whether it's in people at work, or whether it's in terms of health outcomes. And we're also interested in how to promote that optimally, and those are the two main strands of work that we do. So it's commonplace for us. Our Active Lifestyles Research Centre would typically publish maybe 100 peer-reviewed publications per year. We would be operating on probably something like £5 or £6 million a year of grant income. The way we went about the study was to dedicate one of our excellent young researchers, Stephen Zwolinski, to deploy him to work in the schools that were having the health mentors, to shadow the health mentors, to talk to the teachers about the impact, to watch the children as they're undertaking the different activities that the health mentors were delivering, and to assess the impact. The first impressions when we started to look at the data were, wow, there's something very powerful happening here. The weight of the evidence was that there's a powerful impact, both in the intended direction and some of the slightly unintended things that seem to be about school climate, about the way in which the school was shifting to be a more purposeful organisation. The classroom tone seemed to be improving as a product of these young men and women being on the school premises. Often it's not tied to what they're physically doing in terms of whether they're doing physical activity or whether they're mentoring, whatever. It's just their physical presence seems to make a big difference. We were really quite surprised by that. In comparison to other projects, well, we don't see this sort of project very often, because often what's happening is we see people who an example would be football coaches going into schools to promote physical activity. Those data are poorly evaluated, so it's very hard to make a direct comparison. I would say that these are some of the most original data, not least of which because they're in very needy communities. Most research is not deployed in the most needy communities. It's deployed in the communities that will let you in, and they're quite middle class oriented, and so you don't see it in these what we would call hard to reach communities. The major impressions that I'm left with from the data really relate to this idea of school environment or tone, how helping unintentionally disruptive pupils, because the children are not intentionally disruptive, unintentionally disruptive children can be helped to become part of the mainstream school experience and to really start enjoying the school experience. And the value of that is that the teachers don't have to deploy so much attention to those pupils, which means they can deploy their attention to more of the beneficial things of the school experience. And that's hugely important for making schools work better. It's not one child getting better, it's all the children in the school getting better, and the teachers enjoying being in the school better. That's really vital. The physical activity components of Project Hero are really very important, because we know how young people their learning processes are implicitly tied to physical activity. Their learning is characterised by a concept called embodied cognition. What that means is, as young people move, they are learning. They're adapting their brain also so that when they go to an active learning scenario, they're in a better place to learn. So physical activity is not only good for them, it's also good for the activities that they do in the classroom. That makes the classroom, the physical activity that they're doing, hugely important for affecting the tone of their behaviour in class and in school. One of the important outcomes that we detected was the role of the mentors in affecting the emotional well-being of the school climate and of individual pupils. That might not seem like it's a terribly important thing, but what we now understand about the way young people function is that emotion is central to attention, and attention drives learning, and learning drives performance. So if you take that pathway, emotion, you need to get positive emotion in more and more pupils, because that gives them access to their prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of your brain. That means they can do better in school when we surround them with positive emotions. Where we have children who come from really difficult home circumstances, they're dominated by negative emotions, and that has to be undone in the school environment so that they can do well in the school environment. What we find is that the evolved mentors are very useful in terms of producing positive emotion for these children. Once you have positive emotion, that's a clue that you're safe, and for many of these children that was an unusual experience. In relation to the extension of Evolve into public health, what's happening is that the young people are acquiring experiences that are helping them with self-control. Once they can learn self-control, they can start to deploy their own health behaviour and control that health behaviour. This is a massive investment potentially for better well-being in the hard-to-reach communities. That's one of the potential benefits. Now, what we'd need to see is more Evolve projects being tested in a similar way to what we've seen, and also to have more direct measures of self-control. But to assess that kind of idea, the latest evidence is that with more self-control, the trajectories into adult life are improved if you have higher self-control, and if you have lower self-control, the trajectories into ill health, to crime, to poverty, etc. are all made worse the lower your self-control is. In relation to education, the experience that we've had when talking to head teachers and classroom teachers, which is kind of probably what we'd expect if it was rolled out more widely, is that this is going to affect your school climate, because it's very helpful for disruptive pupils, for their disruption to be lowered, so that classrooms become much more functional, more purposeful environment for teachers to do better. So the fatigue factors, the burnouts kind of things for teachers, much reduced. This makes schools much more functional units. An interesting take on what I think we're seeing in this project is the value of employing young people and bringing them into schools. We were struck, and this isn't a male versus female argument, but we were struck by how rare it was for males to be in primary schools and how important it is to have young, relatively athletic young men in schools, and just their physical presence made a difference in the schools. There seems to be something very important there, and this is not anything about the female staff, they were doing a great job too, but there's something about maleness in primary schools that's been underplayed so far, and I think we can do better there. It would seem that on the basis of the evidence we've seen so far, there's a powerful case to be made here for people whose role is dedicated to this idea. And what that means for higher education and institutes of higher education is a whole new opportunity for preparing young men and women for these kinds of roles. It's a new concept, but it's what the real wide concept of health is, and that's very different to what's the difference between being sick and not sick. This is about 21st century understanding of optimum functioning for everybody, for all the people who go to school getting better. We couldn't always say that's been the experience of school so far. In relation to what the neuroscience is telling us about what's happening with young people now, they're very different to how I was when I was a young person. We see each generation comes to school with different cognitive demands. Their brains are different, and we're now in a very different time where attention spans are quite low because of social media and the technology that young people have been surrounded by. We really are in a very different time, and the attention that we're getting from the health mentors, etc., seems to be helping so that young people can function extremely well. One other thing that seems to be a benefit that we could be looking at here is how health and education come together. We can't anymore have public health being separate to education, being separate to medicine, etc. We must integrate these services. What we're really looking for is a public health system, not a health care system, that it's everybody's responsibility for health. We need to understand that health is you doing as well as you possibly can in every circumstance in your life, and we need to be thinking about how we can bring those things together, and health mentors seem to be very helpful for these hard-to-reach young people to bring more things together so they become more purposeful and functional individuals.